Hello and welcome to the June IWWG Open Mic. I'm Kelly Dumar from the International Women's Writing Guild. I'm from the board and I am producing the bi-monthly open mic. And I want to welcome you here truly from around the world, all of our listeners and our readers. And I'm particularly welcoming Lisa Ann Braxton, who is here as our featured reader in fiction today. And I will introduce her in just a minute, but I do want to mention just a couple of things that please feel free to use the chat room, say hello to each other. And I am going to invite everybody into video and audio once the time with Lisa is done, and then we move into the open mic. We have pretty much a full open mic lineup today if everybody comes. And we're really looking forward to hearing your voices as well. And let me tell you a little bit about Lisa. She is a member of the International Women's Writing Guild. She's a new member. She is going to read from her debut novel, The Talking Drum. She's an Emmy-nominated former television journalist and the author of The Talking Drum, published by Inanna Publications in May 2020. It's brand new. The Talking Drum is the story of three young couples in the early 1970s and how they're affected when an urban redevelopment project takes over an immigrant neighborhood. She's also an essayist and short story writer. Her stories and essays have appeared in Vermont Literary Review, Black Lives Have Always Mattered, Chicken Soup for the Soul, and the Book of Hope. Now, with The Talking Drum, just to give you a very, very short synopsis, it explores interracial, class, and cross-cultural tensions, along with the meaning of community and belonging. And Stephanie Powell Watts, who is author of No One Is Coming to Save Us, writes, at its heart, this is a novel about who you love and who becomes your home, a moving and skillful debut. We are really honored, delighted to have you here with us today. Lisa, welcome.
Oh, it's very nice to be here. And so as you were mentioning about three young couples in the early 1970s and how they're affected when an urban development project takes over the immigrant neighborhood. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the three couples, and then I'll do the reading. So there is Malachi, Sydney. They are a young couple who just purchased a Victorian house where they're going to put a protest militant bookstore on the first floor called The Talking Drum. Across the street from them is Kwame and Della. Kwame is Malachi's best friend from childhood, and he never left. He never left town. Malachi was an academic who's left academia to come back to open this bookstore. And so Kwame is very streetwise, kind of shady. His girlfriend Della doesn't trust him. And there's some clashes between these best friends because they're in different social classes at this point. Then there's also Omar and Natalie. Omar is a West African drummer, and Natalie is his African-American wife. They're in the neighborhood that's supposed to be taken by eminent domain, and Omar doesn't believe it's going to happen. Natalie does. They're in a rundown building. She wants to move out. He does not want to. So there's all kinds of tension with their marriage. Also, there's an arsonist who's burning down buildings, and people don't know who is doing this. So there's a whole lot of drama going on in my story. So I will read from chapter 8. In this chapter, Omar suspects that his wife Natalie may be having an affair with her voice coach. She wants to be a singer and she goes to the voice coach for lessons. So Omar goes to his Uncle Mustafa. His Uncle Mustafa runs a restaurant. He goes to the restaurant to talk to Uncle Mustafa for advice. I also mentioned in this excerpt Fullerton. Fullerton is the landlord who is pretty much a slumlord, and Omar had gone to see Fullerton days before to get the heat restored, and he was kicked off the property. And at this point, Omar is in the car driving to where his wife is having her voice lessons because he wants to catch her if she is cheating. Every few blocks, Omar glanced at the map he had spread out on the passenger seat of the 1972 Lincoln Continental. He steered toward the voice coach's house in Peabody. Uncle Mustafa had marked in dark blue the roads that he should take to get there. Jabart, Mustafa had said, using the Wolof word for nephew. When the branches of the trees in the forest are fighting, the roots are kissing. Omar always hated it when his uncle, like Kadim, spoke in proverbs. They confused him. He had finished drumming for the lunchtime crowd at La Baobab restaurant and was sitting in a booth across from his uncle during the conversation. "What are you saying, uncle?" "There is nothing more about Fullerton to do. Do not go back to his house. A man has his pride. But there is something about your wife you can do." Like Kadim, Uncle didn't approve of Omar's marriage to Natalie. He never called her by her name. "You investigate. See whether she cheats with the voice coach. You must know." Mustafa knocked on the table with his knuckles to make sure Omar got the point. Omar sipped his ginger beer. "She does not talk to me about that man." Mustafa leaned across the table. "You are not needing to talk. You are catching her." "I don't understand." Mustafa threw up his hands and walked through the kitchen door, shaking his head. He came back a few moments later and dangled a set of car keys in Omar's face. "When next she has voice class?" Omar told him. "These keys are one of my renters. He is here 2 months. He wants reduced rent, so I tell him, let me use the car. Next time you go pick up your wife from voice lesson, early get there." He pointed a bony finger at him. "Find out what goes on. You are sleeping better then." Now with his hands on the steering wheel, Omar was grateful that Uncle allowed him to borrow the renter's car, even though he had never driven a car as bulky as a Lincoln. It reminded him of a small bus. The front end was so long, he worried he would rear-end another car. He was glad he took Uncle's advice and left early so he could arrive long before Natalie's lesson was over. It was best that he know for sure whether or not Natalie was cheating. He leaned across the seat, attempting to smooth the creases in the map. When he got to the block that Uncle had marked with a big blue star, he began checking the house numbers on the mailboxes by the side of the road. The homes were hidden behind tall hedges. He parked by the mailbox with the voice coach's name on it, Costopoulos. Omar walked carefully, his ankles still sore from twisting it weeks ago in Fullerton's front yard. As he stepped onto the porch, his heart pounded. He pressed the doorbell. A speaker emitted classical music. Standing at the door reminded him of the moment on Fullerton's landing when he was waiting for someone to answer. He was fairly sure he didn't have to worry about a police cruiser chasing him out of town, but he feared that coming to the voice coach's house could be unsettling for another reason. It could make clear that what he already felt, that his marriage was falling apart. No one answered. He squeezed the handle on the double doors and pushed slightly, just to test them. To his surprise, the doors opened. He stepped into a brightly lit foyer with a glass chandelier hanging high above his head. He thought about stepping back onto the porch to ring the bell again, or calling out to someone, but decided against it. He heard sound coming from the second floor. Giggling. It was Natalie. He was sure of it. Omar slowly climbed the sweeping carpeted staircase, careful not to make a noise. When he got to the second floor landing, he stopped and listened, holding his breath. He heard a man's voice. The sound was to his right, his palms sweaty on the banister. He followed the sound all the way to the end of the hall to a large room with dark hardwood floors. It wasn't a bedroom. He breathed easier. When he peeked in, he saw the voice coach, his dark curly hair resting on his shoulders, sitting at a grand piano facing away from the doorway. Natalie was standing next to the coach, looking over his shoulder at some sheet music, her back to the door. She was holding a glass of white wine. Another wine glass, half filled, was on top of the piano. The coach leaned over to her and said something. In response, Natalie threw her head back and laughed harder than Omar had ever heard before. Her shoulders shook. He tried to think of what to do next. He stepped into the room. Then he took another step. An uneven floorboard creaked. Natalie stopped laughing and swung her head around. Her smile dissolved and twisted into a grimace. The coach looked up at Natalie and then turned around on the piano bench toward Omar. "How did you get in here?" he shouted in his heavy accent. Natalie touched the man lightly on the arm and explained that Omar was her husband. "I'll talk to him," she said. Omar was incensed. Natalie seemed apologetic, as if Omar was a pest, a bug that had to be swept away. Why are you here? She whispered loudly after she hurried to meet him in the doorway. I wanted to surprise you, take you out for a dinner meal. She rolled her eyes. You're lying. When was the last time you took me out? She looked back at the coach and raised a finger indicating that she'd be back momentarily. Omar followed her out of the room. I know why you're here, she snapped when they got to the curb. You're spying on me. You have these ideas rolling around in your head. What you need to be doing is finding us a better place to live. He gestured toward the Lincoln. I appear in this nice automobile and you do not even appreciate it. She folded her arms across her chest and looked the car up and down. Where'd you get this from? Uncle let me borrow it. She smirked. You think I'm gonna get in that thing, that gangster ride? You must be crazy. Before he could respond, she turned on her heels, went back into the house, and slammed the door. That's it. Oh, I should show the book.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for showing the book. And I will be putting in the chat room the link to buy the book. And what I thank you so much for doing that reading. I wonder if you would maybe talk for a little bit about your process, the inspiration, Lisa, like where, how long was this story germinating for you? And you're also a journalist. And so I'm just curious about what the evolution from idea was to you. Did you know you wanted to write fiction? Tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer as well.
I had been wanting to write fiction ever since I could read. So from about the first grade, I was telling my mother I wanted to be a novelist. And she said, well, that's wonderful, Lisa, but you can't earn a living writing novels. And I really wanted to learn how to write. And I figured, well, if I can make a living writing, I'll try that combination. So I became a journalist. I worked in newspaper journalism as a reporter for a number of years. I also did some radio reporting and television reporting. And all that time, I still wanted to write. I wanted to write beyond journalism and write creatively. I found that when I was working in journalism, it was so fast-paced and required so much energy, I didn't really have much time at all for writing creatively. So toward the end of my television career, I began writing some short stories here and there, a little bit. And once I left TV, I went to work for a nonprofit, and I entered an MFA program at Southern New Hampshire University, low residency, so I could still work and write at the same time. The idea originally was about a husband and wife, or a boyfriend and girlfriend, who meet up in a bookstore, and the woman is wanting to rekindle an old relationship. I've been writing this 7-page scene for years, going nowhere with it, and I took it with me to Southern New Hampshire University, and they helped me expand on that to learn how to have a routine for writing and how to break the walls out from what I had written. And Omar and Natalie, they came along a lot later. I wrote and wrote and wrote about this man and woman in the bookstore, and then them owning this bookstore, which became the characters for the talking drum. And after a while, I was like, wow, I have nothing more to say about these people after about 20, 30 pages. I've got to find more people to populate their world. And Omar was one of them. Just one night, it just occurred to me that I wanted to create a Senegalese drummer. I don't know why, but I wanted to have a drummer. I wanted him to be in the basement of the bookstore. And I knew that I wanted him to be from Senegal. Don't know why, but it really worked out well.
Wonderful. And so this, it sounds like you had a pretty clear vision for the bookstore. It becomes the title.
Yeah.
And is the talking drum also serving as a larger metaphor or idea in the book? Could you say a little bit about that? Because this Senegalese drummer and then the bookstore, it's owned by him.
Actually, my other characters, the husband and wife who own the bookstore, the husband decides to call it the talking drum because he wants to harken back to African villages where the drum was used as a form of communication to let people know about rites of passage, marriages, births. Let's get together for a meeting. And he wants people to come together in the traditional African way to talk about the issues of the day. He wants it to be an intellectual place for people to come and talk and have discourse and different things, have poetry readings, plays, all those kinds of things. But in addition to that, there is an actual talking drum, a literal drum that if you squeeze it a certain way under your arm and you hit it, it sounds like it's talking to you. And Omar's best friend, his actual frenemy, who you'll see when you read the book, Kadeem, knows how to play the talking drum very well. And he both of those drummers are very, very sexy. But with Kadeem, he gets a lot of attention. He gets a lot of attention. Women they throw themselves at him. He's got long dreadlocks and he's squeezing this drum. He's muscular. And Omar is rather jealous because Kadeem has a way of playing that drum and Omar doesn't know how to play it well. So there's a literal talking drum and then the metaphor of the talking drum, the bookstore being a means of communication.
Lovely. Okay, so let me just sort of juggle things here and see, because I see a couple of things in the chat room. This is from Ariel. My question, in case you didn't receive it before, we're honored to have you here today. Someone who was a shy teenager during the 70s, whose short stories and writing and art were my salvation, do you see, as I do today, that some literary writing tropes comparable to those times for women as for women writers today? Do you see that some literary writing tropes are comparable to those times for women as for women writers today? And how so does it seem from your writing, by the way your story draws one in? So that's from Ariel. I hope I've read her question in a way that...
Yes, I'm trying to understand her question. She's saying that some of the writing that appears today is written for that audience of the women who were teenagers back in the 70s and coming along, that they're targeted for that. I think there's a whole lot of, I would call it historical fiction at this point, because as of the 70s and moving back is historical. I think that there are quite a few stories out these days about the 70s, and historical fiction is very popular. So I do think that audience is targeted with those topics, because let's face it, in our age range, we're reading. We have time for reading. Some of us have transitioned out of the workplace, the 9-to-5 job, and I do think that writers know that that's a very good market to target, because we can relate to those stories.
I was also a teenager in the 70s too, so I'm really interested in Ariel's comment, and I'm not sure everybody would have considered me shy, but I certainly consider myself shy. So so it's historical fiction, and another wait, okay, Ariel, we did get your question. Oh, okay, so from Lisa, another Lisa, is there a specific reason you chose the 70s? I think you just really answered that, but...
Well, I can answer that, because I had never written a novel before, and I wanted to have something that I knew something about. I needed to have a comfort level of something that, that I knew. And I grew up in the 70s watching my mom and dad operate a men's clothing store. So that was something that I could relate to. So I had to do a whole lot of research about a lot of things for the book, but that was a comfort level because I was there during the 70s.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed a number of people chatting in the chat room definitely have been drawn in and want to read your book. And I kind of want to talk about one other theme that is not so much in your book, but has to do with something that you had written on the Inanna blog about being writing sort of your first debut novel after 40, and that dynamic for women, because we certainly have women writers of all ages in our group, and I wondered if you wanted to maybe just say a few words about that, about feeling that after 40 was really the right time to do this, because you talked about this, having this desire from such a young age, knowing you wanted to write a novel.
I think that I wasn't settled enough to write the novel earlier because I was running around trying to figure things out. I was in my early 20s, working at a radio station, learning how to do that. Then I was working at a newspaper. Then I left that and I went into working for a nonprofit in the publishing division. Then I went to grad school for television journalism. So I think I was exploring so much, and for me, I hadn't lived enough of life to really have anything that was going to be have texture to it to say. Some people, there's some novelists who are very young and they do well. I couldn't have done that because I didn't really have much to say. So it wouldn't have happened for me earlier. I needed to grow and learn and mature, and it was the right time for me later, past the age of 40.
Do you think you're solidly in the world of fiction and writing novels now, and or do you know?
I think that what it is I have so many interests when it comes to writing that I have to narrow it down. As you mentioned, the blog post that I wrote, and I wrote a essay for a radio WBUR Cognoscenti blog post recently. Essays, I write different things, but I'm realizing that if I really want to write another novel, and I have one in the works, I've got to narrow my universe. So I have to do that. Otherwise, I'm just like I used to be all over the place and not getting something solidly done in a fictional novel, a fiction work of fiction.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That is a reality. I mean, we have writers of all levels, of course, that we attend to and serve, and we're connected to in the guild. But I think this idea that it's hard to choose and say, I'm going to devote and discipline myself to getting this done, because we're creative women and we have so many ideas and so many different ways of expressing ourselves. And I'm interested in the blog you wrote for Cognoscenti, because you and I are both in Massachusetts, and I'm familiar with BUR, and I will definitely want to read your essay. I should say your essay. But yes, we're also limited human beings.
I've always said that I would love to clone myself, to have the Lisa who goes to work and takes care of those things, and that the Lisa who's the writer,
yes,
creative writer. I would love to have two Lisas to get everything done.
Yeah. we would all love to be cloned, wouldn't we? So there's another question. Wonderful living characters from Pamela. Do you character sketch as a separate practice or incorporate their development into the scene initially?
I actually put together a character sketch of each character because in grad school, my professors, they shepherd you through the process in the MFA program, and they said, you need to write a biography, like a couple of page bio on each character. That way, their actions throughout the book will be authentic. You won't have someone acting in a way that's not based on the Bible you produced on that personality. So that's a good practice, because I just find that I initially would just write, and then the characters just weren't always, in sync with the personality I wanted them to have. It was all over the place. So I do the character sketches.
Okay, good. I hope that answers your question, Pamela. And okay, so Marisa is asking, when husband looks for a cruiser, I wonder if this book might be a gateway for communications or reading groups to talk about racism, especially in regard to today's environment.
When the husband looks for a cruiser?
When husband looks for a cruiser. Maybe that is I wondered if the book might be a gateway for communication. So maybe we don't understand that first part, but
what I think is I think that there are a lot of issues that I go through. I talk about in the novel that could be a gateway to timely conversation. For instance, with the police officer in the book, he is the first Black police officer on the force, and the Black community was upset because of violence, police brutality, and they picketed and demonstrated at City Hall, and they found that the testing process to get officers in was biased to keep people of color out. And so they sued the city, got the test redone, and this officer was brought on the force. He applied, went through everything, and he's the first Black officer on the force. So I do touch on that there's, about police brutality. And there are a lot of other issues. These people whose buildings are being taken by eminent domain, they're not in power. They don't have anybody, a politician or someone else in power who is there to help them or to rally for them. And sometimes that's all it takes. It could have been a different neighborhood, but that neighborhood was protected, not because it deserved to be more protected than this other neighborhood. So you see people with power and influence can step on people who don't have that. And that's not fair. And that's something that I'm hoping that will come out in conversation. I also talk about intra-racism, where you see people from the, let's say the African diaspora from different backgrounds, and there's a lot of division there. There's a lot of division between people who are from Africa, people who are African American, people who are from the Caribbean, and you see I see divisiveness. I mean, I hear things, and things are said around me, and there's divisiveness, and I touched on that too. Why do we have that, and why? Why do we have that? And we should talk about these things. So there are a number of issues that I bring up that I'm hoping will spark important, good conversations, especially now that people are talking about how important it is to talk and get to know each other. I'm hoping that these topics that I talk about in the book will also be part of these important conversations people are having now.
Marisa, I'm so glad you asked that question. It sounds like it's a resounding yes. And thank you for taking us into that broader perspective of the whole novel too, because it sounds like it is going to be a powerful book in terms of the conversations being really, really timely right now, as much as it's also historic for those of us who were teenagers in the 70s, that it's also very, very timely. Now, there was one other question I wanted to touch on that I missed. How and when? Okay, so here's from Martell. I'm not sure that's her first name. How and when did you know? This will be the last question we're gonna have time for, but how and when did you know the time was right for writing your book? Did you act on that knowing immediately, or did you wait until the writing made itself available?
I just found the time in my life to do it. I was working for a nonprofit. I knew that I could spend the time doing the MFA program and work at the same time. And it was actually a few years before I got married, so I didn't have, planning a wedding and being married and all those things to, having a husband in my household and paying attention to him. I had a window of time to do it. So that's when I knew the time was right. And getting into the MFA program when I did, and I told my instructors what I wanted to write about, and they were all very encouraging. So I felt that things had aligned for me at the right time to do it.
And you seized the moment wonderfully. Wonderful. I'm going to just segue a tiny bit as we move towards the open mic. Lisa, you and I were talking a little bit before we started this about sort of the timing of bringing out a debut novel. In the middle of the pandemic, the economic crises, the protests, everything that is sort of exploding right now. And so this whole different way of releasing a book is happening. And I wonder, because we do have so many writers that we serve in IWWG and who may be listening, I sort of was thinking that you might have some words of hope about how to reach an audience. We're doing it today, but I guess I just wonder about how you've worked with your publisher, if you have a publicist, that might be useful, just words of hope to other writers who are out there saying, is this the time to even be thinking about trying to get a book published and to reach an audience?
I was concerned when COVID-19 was becoming more and more of a concern in the country. I was concerned, of course, about what it was doing to people. It's just awful what's happening. But I was thinking that this is probably not the best time to have a book come out. I know some traditionally published with the major publishing houses, authors, they had to shut down their events because they couldn't go anywhere. But in my case, the virtual virtual events like this have been so helpful. A lot of the bookstores are doing Zoom events. I was published by a Toronto-based publisher, and originally I had planned not to be part of going up and flying up for the Toronto debut because it was going to just cost so much and it wouldn't be cost effective. But then once things shut down, my publisher decided to do something through Crowdcast. So I was there on the panel with the Canadian authors. I was part of the Canadian release. And I will say that being published by a small publisher is a feminist press. They do a great job. They are out there championing the cause of women writers. So I was blessed to be linked up with that publisher because they want to publish good fiction by women. And they do have some male authors as well, but they really focus on women. And I didn't think that they'd be able to do a whole lot of publicity for me. So I hired a publicist, a New York-based publicist who is working for one of the top 5 publishers. And she's done an outstanding job for me. It's pricey, but she's done an outstanding job. And she's worked with my publisher to coordinate events. And also I was well connected with, I used to be the president of the Boston chapter of the Women's National Book Association, and I'm involved with other organizations, and we all network. Facebook, a lot of the veteran authors have come and they put their arms around us debut novelists, and they said, we're here for you. We know it's a hard time, but we're going to do blog posts. We're going to tweet about you. We're going to go on to Instagram and put photos of you up. So other authors have really come together and helped us and embraced us, and it's been wonderful. So I would say this is a great time to be published because there's so much community. There's so much togetherness in the publishing industry. So I think it's a very good time to be published.
Well, thank you so much for that hopeful message. And I know that you are a presence in our own IWWG Facebook room. And so I'm mentioning that because if anybody wants to, say hi to Lisa personally, that might be a good place for you to do it if you are a member. But otherwise, I want to write you, right now, your website link, I want to put here in the chat room. And then I will put the Talking Drum link as soon as I have a second to do that. But it's Lisa Braxton. What's the URL?
LisaBraxton.com. LisaBraxton.com.
Okay, so that's going into the chat room. It's there now. I will get to the book link, but I know that I suspect a lot of our writers are really gonna, this hasn't been enough, but it's been wonderful. And we're not ending. I wanna just, but we are transitioning. And so I'm gonna wind down here and end the recording, and we're going to move into the All Voices open mic, and then I will put the stuff in the chat room. But well, I just truly want to thank you, Lisa, because it's an exciting book and you're having an exciting time as a debut fiction author, and we're particularly proud to have you as a member of the International Women's Writing Guild. And thank you for all the encouragement to all the other writers out there to build community, reach out, support each other.
And thank you so much, Kelly, for this opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to stop the